Our leading environmentalist has warned that oil production will run out by 2040 and we should start paying $3 a litre at the pump to curb our petrol guzzling.
Terry Tamminen is an energy advisor to California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he's the former head of the Environmental Protection Agency in California. And he joins us now from Sydney. Terry Tamminen, good morning and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, my pleasure.
In your advice to Arnold Schwarzenegger, you some time ago struck what seems to me a very early and good public relations blow when you advised Arnold Schwarzenegger about the nature of some of his cars. Tell us what you advised him to do in relation to his Hummer.
Well, when he was running for governor in the election in 2003, he was criticized because although he's an environmentalist, he does drive a Hummer. And so we converted it to run on hydrogen, and he since has converted another one to run on biofuels. When he drives down the street, it smells like French fries.
I don't know if that's necessarily environmental advantage there.
Well, I think his point was to show that you can power vehicles of any size today on alternative fuels that are more sustainable and healthy for the planet.
You can if you have the money that, say, Arnold Schwarzenegger might have to convert a Hummer. It's a lot more expensive when you're talking about doing it at commercial levels.
Well, that's true, and of course mass production brings the price of everything down. You need those first adopters. I remember the price of my first cell phone, for example, and compare that to what they cost today. So his point was to say, let's get started.
We've been talking for some time about peak fuel, about the point at which we're going to have reached the most that we can scrape out of the ground, and those levels will start to decline. You've got some pretty alarming figures to share in your view on that.
Well, absolutely. I mean, first of all, in my book, Lives Per Gallon, The True Cost of Our Oil Addiction, I talk about the fact that we actually pay about 3 times whatever the pump price is for all of the externalities related to oil. And then the latest one, of course, is the fact that we're going to greater and greater lengths to get it out of the ground. We're using other cleaner energy sources to get it out of the ground. For example, in Canada, where they're trying to get oil out of the tar sands, they spend about 4 units of energy input for every 1 usable unit of energy output that comes out of the ground, and they're wasting a lot of natural gas in that process.
Just putting up the price of petrol, though, doesn't necessarily mean that we end up with more fossil fuel. It just slows down our usage of it. It just puts off the day of reckoning, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and we know with geopolitics being what they are, the story you just reported on in Iraq, for example, not exactly a secure place, and at this point I would say most people agree that that war was largely about oil. We're going around the world using our military to secure a supply of oil, and of course China and India, their growing economies, are outstripping our demand in Australia and the United States for oil. So it's a global competition to get what's left, and that's why it's so urgent to move to something cleaner and more sustainable now.
You don't see, though, do we, very much interest on the part of, let's just stick with transport for the moment, car manufacturers to try and convert the majority of what they manufacture to sustainable energy? It's still a bit of a niche market.
It is, but they understand that the markets are changing and they want to be ready for what's next. I drive a Honda Clarity, which is a hydrogen-powered car that's now starting to come off of assembly lines in Japan in small numbers, but getting real-world experience. Virtually all the other major car companies are experimenting with both hydrogen-powered cars, battery cars. Of course, in the United States, we have a lot of biofuel cars now that run on ethanol. That hasn't been a great experience for the United States, the ethanol, but now science is finding ways of making ethanol out of waste material, which could actually be good for the planet and for our energy security.
Do you think that what's happened to the Toyota Prius car and that international recall, do you think that will be a major PR blow to not only that particular brand name and that mark, but to the idea of cars that run on alternative energy?
I don't think so in the long run. You know, after more than 100 years of research and development and perfecting, so to speak, the internal combustion engine, we still have fiery crashes and people sadly dying in explosions of gasoline cars every day. You have to treat any kind of combustible fuel seriously and with caution. But I think the Prius, most people understand, there are recalls every day on various vehicles, and it doesn't necessarily attack the technology. It was one particular problem with one particular brand.
Do you have a view on whether baseload power in communities as large as the major cities, say, around Australia and, of course, in a place like California, that can ever be, the fossil fuel-driven baseload power can ever be replaced by alternative energy?
Absolutely. You know, there's two pieces to that puzzle. One is energy efficiency. And in California, we've proven our state is 40% more energy efficient than the rest of the United States. And that's because of rules that we passed, many in the Schwarzenegger administration, to make our appliances and buildings more energy efficient. And then, of course, as you bring up the amount of renewables, that increases that percentage as well. I power my home, for example, with solar panels and send excess power back to the grid. I'm soon going to be using that to electrolyze wastewater to make hydrogen to put in my car. So my rooftop will power both my home and my car very soon, which proves it can be done.
But can it only be done if one has a great deal of disposable income, like I perhaps unfairly assume you might?
No, not at all. In fact, a little enlightened government support. I'm not wealthy. I've worked in public service all my life and run a small nonprofit consulting firm now. But the fact is that investment in solar panels with a little help from the government will pay itself back in 7 years. And after that, I'll be getting free energy for my home and my car. Now, I have the luxury of having a single-family home with a rooftop, and not everybody has that. But we do know that with, again, enlightened government policy moving utilities toward renewables, that entire utilities can go out and get utility-scale solar in the desert. You have plenty of sunshine here in Australia, and more sunshine falls on the Earth every hour than is needed to power all human energy needs for a year. So it's just a matter of deploying the technology in the right places at the right time.
Just moving sideways from that discussion, then, I'm sure you'd be well aware that there's been quite a bitter and divisive debate going on here in this country about the need for an emissions trading scheme to try and lower our greenhouse gas emissions. And that fight now has, or that discussion has devolved into a war of policies on the other side from our opposition, the idea of direct action as against taxing companies, as it were, through an emissions trading scheme. Do you have a view on which it would be more effective?
Well, we know that the emissions trading scheme works. We tamed acid rain in the United States with such a scheme 20 years ago. We got rid of lead in our gasoline the same way. And actually, we're told by companies that that's what they prefer, because it allows them to use the marketplace to go out and find the lowest cost way of compliance. And so whatever it takes, if they trade for carbon credits or if they do offsets, somebody else reducing carbon and then they buy the benefit of that, whatever it takes, it allows them to do it at the most cost-effective way instead of just a tax or some other method of dealing with the issue. So in the long run, I think it will work.
Look, it's really interesting to talk to you this morning, Terry Tamminen. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.